Welcome to the 2023 DiLCo lecture series on digital language and communication. I'm Yanis Androutopoulos from the University of Hamburg. DiLCo is a 3-year scientific network on digital language variation in context initiated in 2021. It is coordinated at the University of Hamburg by my colleague Heike Zinsmeister and myself, and includes scholars from universities in the US, UK, Luxembourg, the Netherlands, and Denmark. DiLCo is generously supported by the University of Hamburg within the Universities of Excellence scheme funded by the German federal government and the federal states. The DiLCo network aims to stimulate scientific exchange between various approaches to digital language and communication research within linguistics, broadly speaking, and to bridge gaps between qualitative and quantitative research methods. We organized online and on-site activities such as conference panels, methods workshops, and this lecture series. Our lectures showcase cutting-edge international research by senior and younger scholars who draw on key concepts in social-cultural linguistics to shed light on language variation and change, as well as language ideologies in digital communication. We are recording these lectures to build up a repository that's available open access from Hamburg University's video portal, Lecture2Go, which can be accessed from our website. Each lecture, as well as today's one, is about 40 to 45 minutes, followed by discussion. Feel free to post questions and comments into the chat during the lecture. I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker, Joseph Sung-Yul Park. Joseph is a professor in the Department of English Linguistics and Theatre Studies at National University of Singapore. On his personal website, Joseph describes himself as a transnational Korean American and a linguist specializing in discourse, sociolinguistics, and linguistic anthropology. He received his PhD in linguistics from the University of California, Santa Barbara, with a dissertation on globalization, language, and social order in the ideologies of English in South Korea, and has also worked at Northern Arizona University and the University of Macau. A prolific author and editor, Joseph Sung-Yul Park has authored or co-authored 4 monographs and 7 special issues, including Markets of English, Linguistic Capital, and Language Policy in a Globalizing World, 2012 with Lionel Wee, Metapragmatics of Mobility in Language and Society, 2017 with Adrienne Lowe, and his most recent book, In Pursuit of English, Language and Subjectivity in Neoliberal South Korea, published in 2021. Joseph has developed a distinct approach to digital language and communication, which contextualizes linguistic heterogeneity across modalities of language within broader tensions of global semiotic flows, language ideologies, and power relations. His talk with us today is on the political economy of digital language and the metapragmatics of fansubbing. Please welcome Joseph Sung-Yul Park. And Joseph, the floor is yours. We're very happy to have you with us.
Thank you very much, Jens, for the very kind introduction. I'm really honored to be here to giving this talk at the DiLCo Research Network. So thank you again for Yanis Androutopoulos and Heike Zinsmeister for inviting me, and also for Marcus Marczewski for kind of taking care of the logistics things, and also for everyone for being here. For me, it's this evening, but depending on where you are, it could be morning or other times. Thank you very much. Let me share the slides. Can you see my slides? Okay, right. So so as Yanis mentioned, what I want to talk about today is about the political economy of digital language, digital media communication, and some possible approaches for this. And I'll try to ground this on a specific digital literacy practice, in this case, which is fansubbing. So I guess in this talk, I'm kind of be less focused on the analysis of specific digital language variation phenomena, But hopefully throughout my talk, I will be able to kind of explain why I'm kind of taking a slightly different kind of perspective on digital language. Okay. Right. So as in my title, so what I'm focusing on is okay. What I'm focusing on is the aspect of the political economy and digital language. Okay. So by political economy, I mean how, power intersects with the production, circulation, and consumption of resources and the interconnection between political and economic systems. Okay. And digital media and digital language, in fact, has been quite a widely explored site for research on political economy. So I'm thinking of like people like Vincent Mosco or Christian Fuchs and Tiziana Terranova, who have kind of explored how digital language becomes as a new resource for capitalist profit. And we're kind of very familiar with these kind of things, right? So all the widespread social media platforms are also kind of capitalist kind of ventures, right? So these kind of become like Facebook or kind of Instagram or all these kind of source platforms also are also kind of products of these large capitalist enterprises that have increasing kind of impact on the world economy. Right? So these critical scholars of the political economy of digital media have kind of looked at how language use or discourse and digital context kind of becomes appropriated as capital seeks kind of new sources of profit in the changing global capitalist era, right? And within sociolinguistics as well, there has been a lot of work that takes a critical stance towards digital media. But in my view, kind of most of those work has tended to look at issues of relate to power, but in terms of dimensions of social inequality or in terms of inequality in access, right? So for example, classical studies of digital media communication have focused on, for instance, how men and women, for example, might be treated differently on their online interaction, for example. And another kind of important topic is how the access to digital media might be varied based on one's socioeconomic background and so forth, right? So there has been plenty of critical studies of digital media in social linguistics as well. But in my view, there has been less work that focuses more specifically on the um, economic interests that underlie the digital media use, right? So in other words, there's more explicit engagement with the intersection between digital language and political economy. And I suspect that this might have to do with the fact that it's less easy to see a more immediate connection between political economy and the specific form of language that is being used on digital space. So, for example, I mean, think about how we use language on Twitter or something like that. Who owns Twitter, right? Or in what form of ownership that is, doesn't seem to have a direct impact on the language you use on Twitter, as opposed to the technological advances of Twitter, which seems to have a very direct impact on how we might use language on such platforms. So I guess that might be part of the reason why there's been fewer kind of works that explicitly focus on the political economy of digital language, right? But today I'm trying to kind of make some suggestions of how we might go about doing that, at least one way in which we can do that as a way of kind of suggesting an expansion of our kind of the remit of research on digital language to kind of more dimensions of political economy as well. And the particular perspective that I want to advocate for today is a metapragmatic perspective, right? So basically, by metapragmatics, I mean how meaning is attributed to language use through language use that refers back to itself, right? So in today's talk, I want to talk about how conceptualizations of language may mediate processes of language commodification in digital space. And I'm trying to suggest that addressing this question can be a way of tracing that capitalist appropriation of digital language and communication. So the context or the particular digital media literacy practice that I want to focus on is fansubbing. So basically by fansubbing, we mean the production of fansubs, basically unauthorized fan-made subtitles for audiovisual media content, right? So for example, if you have ever downloaded, some movie or kind of television serials on a P2P site without, through pirated kind of channels, right? So, and if those media products are in a language that you don't speak, for example, right, you would also kind of download a subtitle that somebody has created without specific authorization of the copyright holder, that translates that content into the language that you know, right? So that's the fansubs, and fansubbing is basically the production of fansubs. Fansubs have been kind of widely discussed in, so I want to argue that fansubbing is something that we should consider as part of digital media communication. Fansubbing is not typically something that has been typically focused on in sociolinguistic studies of digital media communication, or within the studies of commodification of language, for that matter. But I want to suggest that it's very important, can be a very interesting kind of practice for us to focus on for the study of digital language, right? So first of all, I mean, digital fansubs are kind of important mode of communication per se, right? So fansubbing is not something of a kind of subtitles are not something of a synchronous kind of communicative mode, right? But when you think about the global circulation of media content, fansubs or subtitles in general become very important ways of communicating across cultures because they mediate the flow of media content from one lingua culture to another, right? So in that sense, fansubs are part of this media communication, right? Of course, and fansubs themselves are not inherently digital, right? Because before the age of kind of the digital media, fans of media products have been producing fansubs, for a long time, right? However, in those days, before digital media, creating fansubs is a very kind of time-consuming kind of process, because let's say if you want to kind of add subtitles to your favorite anime show, for example, on videotape, you need to have special equipments where you can kind of burn those kind of subtitles into the video that you're kind of trying to translate, right? And then have ways to kind of create multiple copies of that and so forth, right? So in analog kind of medium, fansubbing required kind of many different specific kind of technology, and it was also kind of very time consuming, right? And also it kind of involves, a lot of work, and results in very low quality videos, because you're basically kind of making copies of copies, which kind of reduces the quality of the videos, right? So fansubs do kind of predate the age of digital media. However, with the advent of digital media, fansubbing has become much more easier to do, right? So these days, through what's called soft subbing, fansubs or subtitles for videos are not burned into the video itself, but simply exist as a separate text file with the appropriate timestamps, so that video players can read together along with the video file itself, right? So this makes the creation and editing of subtitles very easy and very quick, right? And also, since it becomes a small size digital file, it also becomes very easy to kind of circulate and share across different spaces, right? So for instance, fansubbers might work with software like this. This is a software called AgeSub. It's kind of an older version, but basically you can load the video which you want to translate, right? And you can load the text file. You can either create a subtitle file directly from this, or you can load an existing text subtitle file. For example, the original subtitle file in English. And let's say if I want to create a Korean subtitle file, I can just edit the English, subtitles. Just basically translate the English subtitles into Korean and create a Korean subtitle. Of course, I might need to adjust the timestamps, for the alignment between different languages, but it's kind of pretty straightforward process. And even if you don't have the already have a subtitle file to work from, and you need to kind of find those timestamps where each kind of utterance begins and ends, it's still kind of very straightforward and easy process you can do. For example, by looking at the waveform of the speech and so forth, right? So by working on this digital soft subbing, digital creation of fansubs becomes something very easy and effective, right? And because of that, digital fansubbing has great potential for affecting the existing of media markets, right? Because of the speed and the kind of speed with which these fansubs are created and how they're circulated, it's easy to kind of create this new fan base for certain kind of genres of media or certain specific media series, which does kind of play a very important role in creating new fans of media content in communities across the world, and therefore kind of affecting the existence of media markets, right? So indeed, fansubs have been very controversial in the context of the global media market, right? Because fansubs inherently are infringement of the copyright law, because any translation of text without the author's consent is a violation of the author's derivative rights, right? So basically, fansubs that don't have the authorization of the copyright holder are basically illegal. But then the way in which fansubs are understood within the global media markets is kind of has both sides to it, because on the one hand, as I just mentioned, the free, easy circulation of fansubs are very helpful in creating new fans in new media markets, right? So, for example, in creating new fans of American drama serials in Korea, for instance, right? But on the other hand, they can also undermine the profit that can be made from the global circulation of media content, because fansubs basically go along with piracy of these media content, right? And this was the same with analog fansubbing as well, but in the context of digital fansubbing, this becomes a particularly more exacerbating issue because of the speed with which fansubbing work can proceed, right? So what I want to talk about today is how through such controversy and how fansubs are understood from a metapragmatic perspective, how can we kind of look at the aspect of the intersection between digital media and political economy, right? Because fansubs, as a mode of digital media communication, already occupies this contentious position within the capitalist global media market. So what can we learn from such kind of a meta-pragmatic debates over the place of fansubs in global media markets, right? So one specific example that I kind of want to focus on for talking about this is a particular instance that happened in 2014 in Korea, which in Korea is called the subtitle crisis, right? So it's called a 자막 대란 in South Korea. So basically, this is an instance where a Korean legal firm, on behalf of the Motion Picture Associated of America, filed criminal charges against 15 Korean fansubbers who have been creating subtitles for popular American television drama serials. So in Korea, these drama serials are called mid, so basically short for American drama or 미국 drama, right? These kind of this Motion Picture Association of America which is the kind of association of different global media companies, including Warner Brothers or 20th Century Fox and those kind of big companies, basically filed these criminal charges against these fansubbers. And this is a kind of particularly interesting context because, so for some background about this, 2014 was a time when there was this kind of growth of new fandom for American drama or media in Korean society, right? So prior to this, American drama serials were not that popular because Korea itself already has a big domestic entertainment industry. So there were fewer channels for Korean people to watch American television dramas. So there wasn't much. So this genre of drama was not very popular within Korea, right? But around this time, because of very active activities of fan communities and fansubbers who provided fansubs for these pirated American television dramas, suddenly there was a growth in the market there's a growth in the fans of American dramas within Korean society, right? So by 2014, then there was a very big group of followers of American dramas like Prison Break or those kind of American dramas of the time, right? So in this context, suddenly these companies brought criminal charges towards the fansubbers, right? And it was kind of an interesting moment because this was also the time when the new kind of subscription-based VOD services, basically the streaming services that we're seeing today, such as Netflix and those kind of things, were starting to be launched in Korea, right? So basically, the understanding was that these companies had kind of let the fansubbers do their work, right, of kind of providing fansubs for pirated content until this moment because that was helping the market grow. But once that market grew, and now it became time for these companies to reap profit through these newly launched, streaming services, they started this crackdown so that they can stop the production of fansubs and therefore stop the consumption of pirated American television drama content, right? So indeed, after this incident, there was a kind of a significant drop in the production of fansubs as well as consumption of pirated content, and the launch of these major streaming services what became quite kind of successful. And of course, through the pandemic, they become even more well established, right? So what's interesting about this case is not only this kind of political and economic context, but also the widespread reaction towards this event, right? Because there was a kind of a widespread criticism against this crackdown, not just among the fans of community, but also in the mainstream society and media, right? So, as I said, at this time, the American drama serials had become very popular. So suddenly, with the stopping of this production of fansubs, people suddenly have no way to watch their kind of favorite American drama shows, right? So that's what the title, the name subtitle crisis basically means, right? And many people were baffled because these fansubbers were not really profiting from these creation of the fansubs at all, right? So, and they were just making and circulating for free with the mind of kind of servicing the fan community, right? So many people were kind of baffled by this event, right? And indeed, many were aware of how these kind of, as I just explained, how these media companies had allowed for this circulation of pirated content for a while until the market was ripe for profit, right? So, for example, in the picture I have on the right here, in one major Korean television talk show, discussed this issue, and this picture is one famous movie critic named Ho kind of criticizing the actions of the media corporations in harsh language, right? So what I think is kind of interesting about this is how we can see these competing metapragmatic conceptions of fansubbing from two different perspectives, right? So on the one hand, there's the kind of perspective of the intellectual property regime, which views the fansubs as kind of violation of copyright, right? And on the other end, there's the perspective of the fan community and beyond, which kind of was much more sympathetic to the practice of the fansubbers, right? Um, but I think they're also different terms of how they metapragmatically or language ideologically conceptualize fansubs or the practice of fansubbing, right? Because from the perspective of intellectual property, it seems to be they treat the fansubs as an isolable product, right? So basically, the fansubs are treated as a pure transposition or a straightforward translation of the original audiovisual text into another language, right? So in this case, the fansub is simply understood as a fixed and bounded expression that conflicts with the copyright holder's kind of exclusive claim towards property rights, right? But on the other hand, for the fan community and within the broader society, in the case of the Korean fansub crisis, there was much more stronger emphasis on the social embeddedness of the fansubs, right? Because the fansubs were often conceived in terms of embodied communicative practice, which is inseparable from the fansubber's affect and morality and social belonging. So in the rest of the talk, I'm going to briefly kind of elaborate on this a little bit more by looking at some specific cases. Okay. So first, on the one hand, I guess in the case of from the perspective of intellectual property and copyright law, um, in Korean copyright law, it's pretty straightforward that the unauthorized translations of texts are illegal, right? As I said earlier, and this is of course not unique to Korea at all, but it's kind of more general way in which copyright operates internationally as well, right? So basically, the Article 22 of the Korean copyright law, says that the author has the right to produce or use a derivative work based on his or her original work, which includes the right to create translations of the original text, right? And of course, there is also what's called in copyright law. There's what's called the fair use provision, right, which provides exceptions to such violation of copyright laws, right? And one of those fair use provisions is so basically when the court of law decides on whether something is fair use or not, there are several factors that they consider to decide whether something is fair use or not, right? And one of the things is the influence or the use of the works over the current market or value. So basically, what impact does the translation have on the profit that the copyright holder can make, right? So basically, if by translating this and making an illegal copy, I don't make any impact on the copyright holder's profit, then it might be considered fair use, right? But by creating this fansub, people don't subscribe to your kind of service or don't buy your DVDs, and therefore I make a big impact on their market, then that's not fair use or something like that, right? So basically, in these views, the audiovisual text for which copyright is claimed is basically imagined as a distinct, isolable product, right? And the translation of that product is seen as a kind of another isolable product that is a simple transposition from one language to another, right? So creation of a subtitle, for instance, in this view is simply a matter of finding the right semantic correspondence from one language to the other, right? And each are equally seen as isolable kind of products from which the copyright holder might produce another kind of equivalent copy through translation to create another comparable kind of marketable product in the other lingua culture, right? So this is something that we can kind of link with the kind of more modernist kind of view of language that is often discussed and critiqued within sociolinguistic and linguistic anthropology, right? So basically, all languages are kind of isolated, kind of self-contained kind of systems of organizing meaning, right? And the different languages can be translated into each other, but only through kind of the finding the right correspondence between them, right? And that's it basically, right? So the kind of a more modernist conception of language, which sees kind of language as something that's self-contained, right, and isolable. So when you produce text in a given language, then that also becomes a kind of distinct, isolated product, right? But what I find interesting in this debate about fansubbing, in the case of Korean subtitle crisis, is that there's a lot of kind of orientation to the affective and moral dimension of fansub work, right? So as I said earlier, when there was a lot of criticism about the legal action taken towards the fansubbers in Korean society, but what's interesting is that those criticisms don't necessarily criticize or deny the notion of ownership or copyright per se, right? But instead, they problematize the legal action taken towards the fansubbers based on certain affective or moral kind of characters that people attribute to the figure of the fansubber or the notion of fansub work itself, right? So here I have one example from a newspaper report, which it was produced in the context of the Korean subtitle crisis, right? So this is one particular article from a kind of a major newspaper in Korea, which kind of do a detailed kind of report on what do fansubbers actually do and who are the fansubbers, right? And here I have a translated extract of this article. So basically, this article begins by kind of explain the process through which fansubs might appear on kind of online spaces, right? So once episode 10 and season 9 of the show 24 finished airing on Fox TV in the US, within 1 or 2 hours, the video file for the show started circulating on P2P sites, and soon after that, American subtitles uploaded. And within 24 hours, a Korean subtitle became available, right? And the subtitle, who created the subtitle, apologized for being late, right? Even though it's just produced within 24 hours, right? And then it kind of goes on to describe what kind of people are fansubbers, right? So basically it says fansubbers work on their main profession during the day as office workers or students, and then they make subtitles or at night or over the weekend, right? So for a drama series or difficult translations, four people might work together, forming a team. But most people work by themselves, and it's not easy to find another subtitler who have shared interests. Right? And it takes 4 to 6 hours to create a subtitle for a 6-minute video, and for content that's difficult or requires special editing, it can take even about 20 hours, right? So I think it's kind of interesting because it kind of highlights this the intensity and the difficulty of the work that is involved in creating a fan sub, right? So basically, the fan subbers have to they're basically full-time working adults with respectable jobs, right? As opposed to perhaps the jobless idling youths, right? And they spend their limited free time without any financial reward to create these subtitles for the enjoyment of the others, right? And they also do this with a very strong sense of responsibility and commitment to the fan community that they serve, right? To the extent that they are compelled to apologize when they feel they're late in their delivery, right? So in other words, there's a lot of emphasis on the dimensions of affect and morality, right? So the emotional struggle of the fan subber in kind of as he or she kind of works in isolation, right? So even though there are people who work in groups, what this article emphasizes is that kind of the figure of the solitary, alone fansubber who works alone at night in a lonely, long, difficult hours to create these kind of audiovisual translations, right? And this moral kind of rectitude of not caring for economic benefits and just devoting themselves for the benefits of others, right? So these are some kind of very kind of prominent images of fansub work that are often circulated in kind of discourses on fansubbers in Korea, right? And I think another kind of very startling kind of example is this set of comments that I kind of collected from a online community of fansubbers, right? So Cineast is the one community for fansubbers where people can circulate their own kind of fan subs, right? And also exchange information of fansubbing and those kind of things, right? And it's kind of older post. And back in 2007, there was a post that reported on one of the community members whose kind of ID was Doche, right? And basically, one of the organizers kind of posted a post kind of mourning this passing away of this fansubbers, right? And lots of people, many of the community members kind of posted their kind of condolences to and their kind of memories of this fansubber who passed away. So this fansubber is basically a man who died because of his chronic illness, and he was a man in his 40s and employee who was working for a foreign company and who had experience working in different countries and so forth, right? And it turned out that he was working on fan subs of foreign movies until the day he died, right? So lots of comments kind of, again, kind of reproduce this figure of the lone, hardworking, moral fansubber, like I just talked about, right? So for instance, the first comment says, he must have fought to complete his work to keep his promise, even as he was struggling with his illness. A promise to those he has never met, a struggle with his own self. So how many of us can be sure that we would do the same in the same situation, right? And the next comment says, I've always enjoyed good, hard-to-find movies with subtitles, thanks to such people who work hard in the shadows. It is so beautiful that he worked so hard until the very end with his illness. And the last comment says, like a beautiful flower that blooms at a place where no one else comes to appreciate it, he lived a quiet and beautiful life. Right? So of course, I mean, these are kind of comments to an obituary. So it's understandable that they would necessarily be kind of more serious and mournful. But I think it's also interesting that the connection between the earlier article we saw earlier of how this emphasis on this affect and the morality of the fansubber is strongly emphasized here, right? So again, that's something that is kind of widely circulated in the both in the fansub community and beyond, right? So I think what these examples show that is the Korean viewers don't seem to think of the fansubs not simply as isolated textual product, but something that they understood in terms of the embodied personhood of the fansubber and in as they are in communication with them through the fansubs, right? So in other words, here the fansubs seem to be understood as inseparable from the affective and moral and social processes through which fansub work takes place, right? So in this sense, I think there's a very strong contrast with how fansubs might be conceptualized in intellectual property versus how fansubs are conceptualized within the fan community and more generally, broadly within the Korean community who consume these kind of media products, right? So to wrap up, what I think this kind of example shows is what was at stake in the Korean fansub controversy or the subtitle crisis is the metapragmatic conceptualization of digital language practices and of language more generally, right? So it's not just a matter of application of copyright policy or kind of law, right? But such expansion of the media markets and the interests of capital must involve some struggle or negotiation of such metapragmatic conceptualization of digital language practices. Because basically what regimes of intellectual property does in this case is to erase the social embeddedness of fansubs that people orient to, right? And by erasing that social embeddedness and treating it as a violation of the copyright holders' isolable rights, it kind of rationalizes the expansion of the media market and therefore kind of incorporating the activity of fansubbing within the regime of intellectual property and capitalist profit, right? So in this sense, I think the study of digital language and communication from the perspective of metapragmatics and political economy can be a useful way of problematizing this process. So, and this can, in fact, I think can be very promising because digitized forms of language are subject to very easy extraction and circulation accumulation. And therefore, that's why it becomes very attractive resources for capital. And that's why the capital, global capital, actively kind of tries to appropriate digital language and communication for profit through intellectual property. But at the same time, what we just saw is that digital language is in fact just as socially embedded as language offline. And in fact, the fact that digital media is, unfolds in the context of increased connectivity may mean that digital language and communication, in fact, may be more socially embedded than ever, right? And the field of the study of the sociolinguistic and linguistic anthropological study of digital language and communication, I think is very well positioned to explore such ways in which digital language is socially embedded into the lives and material practices of people who use such digital media, right? Because the aided with more ethnographic and multi or metapragmatic approaches, there can be a wide range of topics and aspects that can be explored for us to understand how digital language and communication is really socially embedded and how we can engage with that social embeddedness better in our analysis. Okay, so thank you very much. That's all I want to say. So I'll stop my presentation here. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Joseph, for this very rich and inspiring presentation. It typically takes a couple of more seconds for people to react after the end of a Zoom talk, I think. Now I've switched back to the overall panel view. We have ample time for discussion. Please raise your yellow hands to indicate a question. You can also put, and if you do so, you're welcome to switch on your camera and put your question in person. Alternatively, you can type in your question into the chat and we'll take them as they come. And the first question I have on my list is by Miriam Locher. Please.
Yes, thank you so much for this very interesting talk. I have a question about the discourses around the legality, illegality. I work on a platform where subtitling is, the streaming is legal, so it's not copyright infringement, but the subtitling is made by fans. So it's the same kind of ideology that they talk about as well, that they're doing this as a service to the fan community. They're not doing this for their own profit, but you do pay. And I was wondering, what I've observed a lot where your approach of capitalism comes in is that if you want to watch, this is wiki.com, if you want to watch it without ads, you pay $5 a month, but the subtitles are entirely fan generated. And a lot of newbies misunderstand the $5 to mean subtitled. And they complain a lot if it takes more than 24 hours. It usually takes 24 hours. And so this discourse of entitlement, I pay, I get something. So even in that platform that is clearly legal, because it is, the licenses are bought to stream, we do get negotiations of morality and duty and a fan community service. And to a lesser extent, discussions around that it's wrong to do the streaming illegally. So when I listened to you just now, I didn't see many comments about from the fan community or the subtitles to understand the point of view of the artists, the point of view that they are actually producing a product for our enjoyment and that they should be given credit and that they should receive remuneration because we're enjoying the product. Is that entirely absent in your kind of discourse that you're observing?
Right, thanks. Actually, no, right? So fans are actually very aware of these kind of copyright issues, right? And actually, the more serious, generally, I guess, the more serious a fan you are, then you actually will kind of respect the copyright of the product, right? Because you do want your favorite shows to continue to be produced and so forth, so that you can and so forth, right? So in fact, the common practice is that people would kind of do create fan subs when there is, for example, when the particular media market you are in is not fast, does not have the appropriate channels for you to pay and enjoy the shows in a timely manner, right? So until those products are available in your country, for example, you might kind of watch it through pirated channels, right? But once it is in, and particularly in good qualities, a Blu-ray disc or those kind of things, those fans would be often be the first people to purchase them, right? But of course, as the community becomes more expanded, for example, the case of the American drama that I just talked about, when the fandom reaches beyond the kind of more committed fans, then there might be people who just are in it because it's free rather than because they care about the as sincere fans, right? So I think at the time, many people who are not really kind of hardcore fans, but nonetheless are, very enjoy watching these shows, might have just simply kind of joined in, watching these downloadings for free and relying on the fan subs in the same way, right? So like the wiki fan users that you talked about, who are not kind of fans but just casual viewers, for instance, right? So there's definitely a kind of wide range of engagement with pirated content, right? And that's also the case with the American drama fandom back in the time of that 2014, as is the case with the wiki community that you were talking about. Yeah.
All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks.
Okay, let's see. Any other questions? Just waiting to see. I have a question. I actually have one myself, but first I'll take one that's into the chat by Chang Zhu. If you would like to put your question in voice, please indicate, else we can take, yeah, so we can take, you can all open the chat. I'll try to skim through the reading. Your talk, the question goes, has offered us inspiration. We've got two questions. First, video games seem to be underexplored in sociolinguistic studies, if not devalued. What is your understanding on the potentiality of exploring language issues in video games? That's a very good one. Second, there are invented languages and scripts in video games. And the interest is in how the invented languages / scripts might construct a new order for the global knowledge flow and intercultural communication on an equal basis. Joseph.
Yes, these are great questions. I think I have to admit that I really haven't thought about these either questions. I'm not really a gamer myself, so I don't have very much understanding of how language works within video games. So I'm afraid I don't have very much to say, but of course I imagine that there'll be lots of interesting things going on, right? Particularly with video games being more interactional, right? And the way in which the translation works to interact with that dimension of interactionality, right? And also, how does what is the kind of a technical and political economic side of translating video games from one language to another, right? So how does I assume there's a kind of different language packs that can be kind of upgrades that can be kind of added on for pirated video games and so forth, right? So I don't have much to say because I don't understand that kind of specific process, except that I'm very interested to hear about that, right? And also about invented language and scripts, that's very interesting. Again, I haven't really thought about this at all, to be honest. But I guess often, as I talked earlier, how the kind of regimes of intellectual property kind of operate based on kind of modernist understanding of languages, which kind of views distinct languages as isolated kind of systems with kind of potential kind of semantic correspondences between them. And I also assume that when languages are invented for video games or whatever kind of media products, they will also be used with similar kind of based on similar ideological kind of understandings of what language is in the first place, right? So I think there would be kind of interesting questions to be asked about this. But again, I have to admit that I really haven't thought about this. So I'm very interested in hearing about what you have found about this. And I'd be happy to have more conversations with you based on the studies that you're doing right now. Thank you for the question.
And I'm just typing into the chat the name of an author, Astrid Enslin, who has done a lot of work on language in video games and at the intersection of, let's say, digital humanities and sociolinguistics, also with an emphasis on language ideologies and things like that. I'll go for my own question, Joseph, and in engaging in following up with your argument about these two metapragmatic conceptualizations of language and language practices, I was wondering whether there might be a way to, to include the analysis of the subs themselves, the subtitles themselves, into going into this argument, and in particular, by comparing fansubs to professional subs. Now, I understand that this comparison is not always possible because some things are only fansubbed and not professionally subbed, but maybe it is in other cases. Anecdotally, I have noticed myself on the example of Greek fansubs that they show some striking differences from the professional fansubs. So Greece is a subtitling community. Germany is a dubbing community, but Greece is a subtitling one. So when you see sub fans on pirated copies, they might crack indecent jokes at the beginning of the film. So there are deviations from the norm of equivalence. So the equivalence of the subtitle to the spoken language, and there are deviations by the subtitle addressing the viewers, for example, or there might be deviations in terms of language style. So professional subtitles and professional language in film has a very clear sensitivity to audience design. So the subtitles are cast in a way that everyone can understand, so a broad mainstream audience. And fansubs may divert from that and craft and tailor their language style to the specific community they address. So I was wondering whether what you refer to as the social embeddedness of subtitles is in some way indexed by the subtitles themselves. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, that's a good question. Yes. So I didn't have time to talk about this, but I guess one way in which the fansubbers often try to, so I guess fansubbers often kind of one topic that is often discussed in fansub communities is in what way how fansubs are kind of more superior to kind of more formal and professional subtitles. And one way in which fansubbers might often claim that is through their own kind of more, for example, expert knowledge of the kind of content that they're translating, right? So, for example, the context of American drama serials, they might claim that they have more deeper knowledge about the specific terms that American police officers use, the secret codes that they use, and those kind of things. So, such information about what does this code mean and those kind of things might often be circulated and used within the fan community, right? And those kind of things. And other things are, and one way in which fansubbers might kind of demonstrate such knowledge is to produce, in addition to the subtitles of the audio itself, add some kind of notes that explain what particular things mean, right?
Yeah.
So those kind of things are usually avoided in professional
Yes.
subtitles, right? But fansubbers have more freedom to do that. And within the fansub community, it's not necessarily that everybody kind of prefers to have these kind of additional notes. But when they do appear, that is usually a kind of way of the fansubbers kind of demonstrating their expert knowledge, as well as their kind of a way of assisting the other fans who are viewing the video to kind of deeper understanding of the content, right? And also, in the kind of software that I showed you, it is possible to produce more dynamic subtitles these days, right? So the subtitle is usually, of course, more static text on the bottom of the screen. But these days, you can kind of make the subtitles, for example, move or change in color and change in shape. So some people kind of do more elaborate subtitling so that the move of subtitles move along with the movement of the speakers, for example, and those kind of things, right? Which kind of helps kind of the language feel more blending into the action and those kind of things, right? And those kind of things are often praised by fansubbers or viewers of the of these content, right? So those are, I guess, some ways in which the fansubber, the specific form of the subtitles might differ from the professional subtitles, which also kind of contributes to the construction of the legitimacy and the authority of the fansubbers. Yeah.
Thank you. Great. That's very interesting. I will take another one by Erin McInerney. And here you go.
Hello.
Hi.
Well, thank you very much for this talk. And I'd also like to thank the organizers for putting this together. I'm curious, today we looked at two majority language examples, and I'm curious what your thoughts are about the implications for the profitability side of this when one or both of the languages in question is a minority language or perhaps a regional variety. I think it problematizes this idea you set out of it being an isolated product, that their vision of it as being a contained system, especially when we talk about language varieties. So I wonder if you've looked at that at all. Perhaps it'd be an interesting question about the sense of community within that micro body of translators. Is that something that you have any thoughts on?
That's a good question. Again, it's not something that I've seen very much, right? Because obviously the specific kind of issue of intellectual property becomes an issue in the context of these large media companies, which are often American and produces things in English, right? So therefore, often the issue when the issue of kind of copyright becomes prominent, it's usually between English and Korean. But of course, there are people who are producing kind of fansubs for films in a language that are other than English, and in some cases, I guess, more smaller languages. But those are kind of more minor, and I guess those will still often be done through the mediation of English, right? So, for example, the fansubbers who translate film in a kind of a, let's say, a smaller European language, for instance, would not necessarily be knowledgeable in that language per se, but be working from English language DVD or something like that, right? And the fansubbers are still doing that actively, right? Because again, those kind of media products are less subject to the stricter copyright infringement because the market itself is much smaller, right? So, so in other words, these issues don't come up very much when it's a language involving a smaller language other than English, right? So yeah, so I haven't really thought about the implication again, but I think that would, so that might be one site to look more closely into, right? So how do the fansubber in this case kind of conceptualize his or her relationship to that language as they mediate between this language other than English and Korean, right? And what implication does it have for the, the understanding of fansub work in this case, right? I imagine that it would kind of add more to that sense of devoted kind of service to the community, because it is something that could be overlooked, right? And might not be kind of easy to kind of access for people beyond the fan community to access in the first place. So, okay.
Thanks very much.
Thank you for your question. Yeah.
A quick one by Miriam, because we're running out of time. Bitte schön.
It was more of a follow-up comment. If there's an actual question, then I can withdraw.
No, if please place your comment. That's fine.
Okay, well, I found it, Erin, your comment very interesting with the, because in Wiki, I observe that for sure English is the pivot language. That's the first one translated into. And what you showed us before with your screenshot of the actual program that allows you to translate, right? You translate over English. Doesn't mean that, the other language people don't know Korean. My data is from Korean into other languages. But of course, more people know English. So I found it fascinating to see what impact the pivot language has on the follow-up translations. Do the follow-up translators actually still engage with the original cultural artifact, or do they see it via the English translation? And that affects the comments that you mentioned, Joseph, the fan comments about explaining cultural context as well. I think there's a lot of research to be done about ideologies that enter the system via the translation processes. I find that a super fascinating research field.
That's also a fascinating interface to translation studies, I think. Mm-hmm. We shall conclude on this note. Thank you very much for today. Thank you, Joseph Sung-Yul Park, Sung-Yul Park, I'm sorry, for the fascinating talk, and thank you all for the great discussion and attendance.
Thank you very much.
Please meet us today in 1 month, 23rd of March in the afternoon, for the next talk by Malvina Nissim from Groningen.